Welcome. I'm Jane Shaw, and I'm president of the John William Pope Center for Higher Education Policy, and I'm delighted to see everybody here. You're in for a treat, I assure you. For those of you, and I think there may be a few who aren't familiar with the Pope Center, let me just say that we're the only organization in North Carolina dedicated to the reform of higher education, both here and nationally. We are concerned about slipping academic quality, lack of cost control, abandonment of the core curriculum, and the politicization of classes and campuses. You can learn more about us at popecenter.org. And we haven't formally started, so just find a place. There's plenty of room there. I do want to mention that we have several Pope Center board members here, and maybe they will identify themselves as I name them. Let's see, we have our chairman, Arch T. Allen, and Jack Summer, Joe Lindsley, and our newest board member, Susan Tannehill. Thank you very much. We have a very full schedule, so I'd like to turn the microphone over to George Leaf, our Director of Research, who many of you know, who will moderate this event. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Jane, and thanks to all of you for coming out on this wonderfully warm October afternoon. Now, we're very fortunate today to have with us two men who are uniquely placed to comment on the state of higher education. Ken Starr, the president of Baylor University in Texas, and Peter Hans, the chairman of the University of North Carolina Board of Governors. I'm going to begin by introducing Ken Starr, and then after his presentation, I'll introduce Peter Hans. Ken Starr became the 14th president of Baylor University in June of 2010. And since then, he's been doing the zillion things that college presidents have to do, but chiefly focusing on controlling costs and protecting academic standards. Now, I was lucky enough to hear him give a talk on this last November, and after that, I was flabbergasted and delighted when he offered to come halfway across the country to talk about these topics for the Pope Center. Now, if I tried to give you the full measure of Ken Starr's career, that would take up just about all of our time, so I'm going to give you the highlights reel. He earned his bachelor's degree from George Washington University in 1968, then a master's degree in political science at Brown in 1969, and as if that weren't enough academic stuff, then he took his law degree at Duke, graduating in 1973. At that point, he began a remarkable career in the legal profession, which includes clerking for Chief Justice Warren Burger, teaching law at New York University, George Mason University, Pepperdine University, and he still finds time to work in a seminar on constitutional law at Baylor. He's argued 36 cases in front of the United States Supreme Court, including 25 while he served as the U.S. Solicitor General. He served for 6 years as a judge on the District of Columbia Circuit Court of Appeals. He's written a highly acclaimed book on the Supreme Court entitled First Among Equals, The Supreme Court in American Life, published in 2002. And last but not least, and perhaps most infamously or famously, he led 5 independent counsel investigations into government corruption from 1994 to 1999. Ken Starr's talk today is entitled Higher Education, Working Hard or Hardly Working. Please join me in giving a warm and appreciative greeting to Ken Starr.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, George, for that very kind introduction. Jane, Madam President, where did you go? How about a round of applause for the president of this very important center and friends from prior incarnations, the Currans and Dean. Thank you. Once the Dean, Campbell, always the Dean as far as I'm concerned. I still get called Dean from time to time, and friends from Baylor. So thank you all for being here. And I'm the warm-up act. And I'm excited and honored. And so I wanted to begin this conversation, and it is going to be a conversation in the great spirit of the foundation. And why don't I begin? I guess I need to stay here. I tend to be more peripatetic, so I'll stay at the lectern. At the founding, the first Congress of the United States, sitting in New York, and getting, shall I say, the legislative house in order, turned early on to a question of education. Happily, it had a blueprint before it. It was not, as it were, starting or writing on a blank slate. What it had before it was a measure that had been enacted into law by the Continental Congress 2 years before in 1787. So late in the governance of the polity under the Articles of Confederation. And the Confederation Congress, or the Congress under the Articles of Confederation, the Continental Congress, passed the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, and taking that language precisely, no change whatsoever, the new Congress, so our Congress under America's Constitution, with General Washington, now the Chief Magistrate, included these words in law, which stand to this day in the United States Code. Religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. If we had that up on the screen, I would want us to meditate on that text. And it would be good, I think, for all of us in higher education to return to that text, whether we're in public higher education or in private higher education. Indeed, for education more generally. As we know, it was General Washington's great dream to have a truly national university. We have a state senator here who graduated from West Point, and that was important to the general. But that was not what he had in mind. He wanted, as it were, a civilian national college to create a gathering place for future leaders, educating in the classical sense for leadership. We know the great story of Dr. Franklin with his genius, and yet feeling so strongly that in addition to libraries, that there also, and the Postal Service, that there should be a great university in his adopted city of Pennsylvania and the University of Pennsylvania. Obviously, Mr. Jefferson. When you think of all that Mr. Jefferson accomplished during his magnificent career, and yet what are the three things that he chose to be sculpted until, for time immemorial, on his tombstone? It was not that he served as President of the United States, but one of the three, as you know, was that he was the founder of the University of Virginia. That is the story of America. Indeed, prior to the founding, when we scroll back in time and we go back to the 17th century and the founding of Harvard, and we read from the New England First Fruits, the great soaring vision of that early generation that said, now that we've established our homes, our places of worship, our civic government, we long now to establish a college. And John Harvard made a generous contribution that I'm sure his ancestors are very happy that he gave his books to the little college that then bears his name. When you look at the history then of America and the westward movement, what do we see but the establishment of colleges and universities, so that at the time of the outbreak of the Civil War, there were more colleges, institutions of higher learning in the state of Ohio than there were in the entirety of the mother country. Americans love education. That's in our DNA, so much so that when blood was being spilled in an unparalleled way before or since on the battlefields of the Civil War, it was Mr. Lincoln who signed into law in 1862 the Morrill Land-Grant Act, looking ahead to the promise of the West, the great lands that could be opened up, and to ensure that lands were sold and the proceeds used for higher education. During the Reconstruction of the South, the Morrill Land-Grant Act was then extended to the southern states, and how many colleges and universities, some 80 I'm informed, owe their genesis to the generosity of the people, we the people, as the preamble sets forth. Onward it came then, of course, the GI Bill, with the idea, and this was so bipartisan, that education was so important that what would become the greatest generation, those farm boys and people from small little communities and the great cities, could have an opportunity, after having served their country in such a magnificent way in both theaters of war, to have higher education. Think then of the civil force and the economic power that was generated by virtue of all that has transpired. And yet, we know we are in this time of challenge, and our president, Jane, lifted up some of them. The list is long, and so it is a time of introspection for higher education. And we do well in higher education to listen with great respect to the voices, no matter how strident the voices are, how strong the voice and how strongly worded. We need to listen with great respect and to take to heed and to heart the criticisms of this great, great blessing that I believe has been so critical not only to American prosperity, but at least as important, the creation and fostering of the culture of liberty, the culture of freedom. Let's turn to some of those critiques, and then I will briefly talk about possible ways of responding to the critiques. I'm going to quote from two great leaders from higher education in the private sector, and I apologize for that because most people here are very involved in public higher education, but we do have some of us here. Duke is represented, and Campbell is represented. The Dean of Arts and Sciences of Harvard College, Harry Lewis, many of you are familiar with his haunting work. It's been out for a while, 2006. He was the dean. In effect, he was the provost of Harvard. During his tenure, the Dean of Arts and Sciences effectively served as the chief academic officer of that great university. And I quote from that 2006 book, "Excellence without a soul, how a great university forgot education." It's pretty haunting, isn't it? American universities have forgotten their fundamental mission. Notice he's not leaving that just to Harvard. To help college students grow up, to learn who they are, to search for a larger purpose for their lives, and to leave college as better human beings. Friends, I'm the first to stipulate jobs are important, and I don't in any way want to gainsay the transactional and instrumentalist value of being prepared to go into the economy, the for-profit or non-for-profit world, and to be a constructive and productive citizen. But for our reflections today, I want to stay with what I would just lift up as the classical view of what education is all about. Anthony Kronman, Dean of the Yale Law School, trained first in philosophy. In his book, 2008, Education's End, Our Colleges and Universities Have Given Up on the Meaning of Life. Tony Kronman, to attempt to provide students in liberal arts programs with the broad structured and shared introductions to the alternative views of life's purpose and its value is today an increasing rarity in American higher education. And the idea that it is even worth trying to do so is one that many teachers and students reject. The hollowness of our enterprise. Then I turn to someone who spent his career in the humanities in public higher education, John Somerville, who in the year 2006 authored The Decline of the Secular University. Quote, "If the point of the secular university was to eliminate the religious dimension, it will eventually find that it has eliminated the human dimension as well." Now, some of you will perhaps think that this is all academic hyperbole, but I think these three voices are calling on us to consider, and they're serious voices, that whether is this the way it is, and if that is the way it is, does it have to be that way? And I think as you read through their books, their recommendations, because theirs are not works of despair, they're works of hope, that the message of all three of these great towering figures in the American Academy is that something can be done about it. This is not preordained. It happened, and it can be changed. And the change will need to be generated from both within and without. Both within the university, such as the voices we have heard, and then outside the university, including trustees and alumni, as well as parents. So it's against this backdrop that I want to just say a few words about the Baylor experience, but in, I hope, a broader context. And I'd like to set that stage briefly by talking about Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. I used to argue in front of her when she was a judge, and she usually ruled against my position, but that's okay. We sometimes say, old lawyers never die, we just lose our appeal. As she tells the story, and I have a feeling most, if not all of you in the room have heard her relate the story, it's now over 10 years ago, she perceived a threat, it was her perception, to that which Alexander Hamilton in the Federalist Papers, specifically Federalist 78, lifted up as absolutely bedrock to the new proposed government. And that was the independence of the federal judiciary, independent from politics. And talking about the importance of judicial experience and seeing what she saw, if one agrees, the erosion of values that Mr. Hamilton lifted up in Federalist 78, she concluded, my audience has no idea of what I'm talking about. I had to scroll back and to remind everyone or to educate everyone of some of the foundational points of the American political system. And as she looked around, and this definitely crossed ideological lines, because I've heard Justice Breyer speak to this, I've heard former Justice Souter speak to this, but Justice O'Connor used a pretty strong word to describe civic education in the United States. She said, it has collapsed. Now, I use that as a window into the broader question. If there's been a collapse of civic education in the United States, and I hope that you will at least assume for purposes of argument that there has been, and perhaps others will disagree with the critique, what again can be done about the changes that have occurred in education, including higher education? Well, I want to talk about, very briefly, 3 steps. The first is the commitment or the recommitment to a truly rigorous curriculum. The studies are tending to show that our students are just not working as hard as we used to. You know, we used to talk about the good old days. I don't do that anymore, because the good old days had their problems and challenges too, right? But at least if these surveys are to be believed, college students in America are now just studying a whole lot less. The 40-hour study week, that's not classes. How much time are you spending out of class to prepare for class has been steadily declining from 25 years ago. 40 hours sounds like, all right, a 40-hour week, okay. But that's study time now. 40 hours a week, we're now at 23. One would think it would be just the reverse. The world is so much more complicated. Yes, I know there are tools that we didn't have when I was in school, but even so. Now, is that telling us something about the load, or is it telling us something that the students are carrying, or is it also telling us possibly something about the substance? of what they're studying. Well, we do have help now, and I know it's not without controversy what in life is. But the American Council of Trustees and Alumni was formed some few years ago, and a lot of you in the room, I assume, know it, to say we're going to take a look, they use their criteria, at the rigor of the curricula of over 1,000 colleges and universities in the country, and we're going to give grades. So thinking of that, over 1,000, now there are some 4,000 plus institutions of higher education, but all of the large publics and privates, you know, it's a large and representative sample, both public, private, and so forth. This last year, and there's been no dramatic shift, the ACTA review resulted in, and they give letter grades and no pluses or minuses, 23 A's. You might very well be saying, well, Baylor must be, well, of course Baylor got an A. Because we require our students to do a lot, and that's controversial, isn't it? No, we don't want to have so many requirements. And there's a pedagogical case to be made for a greater opportunity of menus of choice. It's a policy choice. But let me draw from Sandra Day O'Connor and say this. At Baylor, we have required every student for over 60 years to take the American constitutional tradition, where they read the Federalist Papers. They understand, if they didn't understand on the way in, and they must take it. Now, because we're a Christian university in the Baptist tradition, this will not apply obviously to the publics, you take Christian scriptures. I'm sorry, we require it. You take Christian heritage, the heritage of the church. You've just got to do it. But I could go on. The idea is we have a very significant curriculum that everyone has gone through. And do you know what? I guess it's somewhat like boot camp. You might not want to do it again, but you're glad that you did it, and you're the better for it. Now, I understand that some of this will be a real challenge, both as a political matter, but some of it, will, of course, will be impossible as a First Amendment matter under the Establishment Clause. I appreciate that. So I'm not suggesting that now every public university needs to follow this particular model. Each institution will have its own history, its own DNA. But the point more broadly is that's our application of the principle. We want to have a rigorous curriculum. If you go on the website of ACTA, the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, check it out and see where your alma mater fits. And then look at their criteria. And maybe you'll agree or disagree. Welcome to America. But at least you will have something that is there. So we think that's point one. The commitment to or recommitment to a rigorous curriculum as designed for the history and traditions of that institution. But surely we can all agree, I would think, that the American constitutional tradition merits serious consideration so that no one can be said when he or she graduates from whatever the college or university is, that that person is just another example of what Justice O'Connor calls the collapse of civic education in the United States. Second, we seek, and this is difficult, it's going to be controversial, we seek to educate for what the classics called wisdom. Wisdom. Our Institute for Faith and Learning sponsored a gathering not long ago, and I love the title. I wish I'd come up with it, but I'm not clever enough or wise enough to come up with it. Are you ready for this? Educating for Wisdom. We were astonished at the outpouring of interest because we think that what was being discussed over those 2 days from college and university leaders around America was sort of satisfying this hunger and this thirst for, there's got to be more than these instrumentalist kinds of courses, as important as those are. What kind of person are you? Are we asking these, are we taking the deep dive into the questions of human existence? What is it that makes us human? What's our purpose? What is this life all about? Obviously, coming from a theological perspective, we have a frame of reference, But as I was reporting, I am told that at our latest demographic survey, we have 243 self-declared atheists at Baylor. Welcome to the conversation. They enliven it. The point is, there needs to be the kind of transformational experience aimed toward the good life, the virtuous life, the wise life. And how can that be achieved? And this is an increasing challenge for higher education, and that is the development and fostering of mentoring relationships. The studies all show it. The anecdotal evidence to me has proven to me beyond a reasonable doubt that there is a need and certainly a hunger on the part especially of undergraduates to have a mentoring relationship, a meaningful mentoring relationship with faculty, or at a minimum, a wise graduate student. And not just about vocation, but avocational issues, including this, help me think through this. What are my gifts? We make everybody go through essentially what we call in institutional life a SWOT analysis, a strengths analysis. We put it theologically, what are your gifts? What are your talents? All right, do you want to play to those, or do you want to focus on what, by your own examination, are your weaknesses, and you want to buttress those up? It's your determination, freedom of conscience, but you may want to really focus on what your strengths are and trying to enhance and improve on that, and if I may be instrumentalist, to leverage those. I'd say, well, does that have any applicability over in STEM? We had a wonderful conversation last evening about STEM and the importance of STEM, and I'm emphasizing the liberal arts and the humanities. But in STEM, one of my favorite examples is a biochemistry professor who does NIH grants on cancer research, Dr. Kevin Penny, who's a very charismatic guy. He's got this huge laboratory. I don't understand what goes in the laboratory, but I've been in it several times and said, this is really good. I'm really delighted that it's here, and he's got postdocs and graduate students. And so I said, Kevin, what's the difference in your attitude in teaching here as opposed to teaching someplace else? And he said, here our attitude on the faculty is the students come first. The students come first. Is it surprising to know that Kevin Penny is a great mentor and that he is helping guide these young students, whether it's to med school or whether it's off to a PhD, graduate work in chemistry or biochemistry? This is what we need more of. Faculty who in the great tradition are saying, I want to help you, the experience, hopefully wisdom born of experience, I want to help you. And I want to help you not just in, again, instrumentalist terms, but also to think about the broader question. What should I be doing with my life? Third thing I want to mention is extending the academic enterprise beyond the campus to the culture. And in these remarks, I'm not talking about online learning, which is very important. I'm not talking about blended learning, hybrid learning. I'm not talking about the MOOCs, the massive online courses. Very important conversation to have. I want to talk at a different kind of level. And I think here, higher education, including Baylor, has fallen short. And that is to promote a culture of freedom. That freedom is foundational. That the constitutional arrangements were set to do what? Not just to achieve specific goals such as to establish justice, lawyers and judges, as important as that is. Not just to provide for the common defense, but the concluding, it's like a great symphony and you reach the climax in the preamble, and to secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity. Here we are. So I think we in higher education have to ask ourselves, are we taking steps consistent with academic freedom, which is foundational, to promote a culture of freedom here at home and indeed around the world? I think we need to ask ourselves that. One way is encouraging practical engagement in the actual marketplace. Because it is the marketplace that is a breeding ground, and I say this as a matter both of practice and of social philosophy, a breeding ground for creativity and innovation that promotes human flourishing in a very direct way, but in a sort of feedback loop promotes the culture of freedom. I recently had the occasion to speak with a renowned professor at the University of Pennsylvania who may be the leading engineer in connection with respect to a magnificent invention, aerial robotics, and I'm not talking about drones and drone warfare. His applications, let's leave that aside. His applications are search and rescue. So these are airborne robotics, and you know what I'm talking about. Agriculture, but those are the two areas that he is focusing on. He is from India. He had his undergraduate education in India. And I was so moved, and then he came to the United States, had his PhD, and he's been here, he's 50 years old. So I go up to him after his speech, and you can imagine, given my interest in public policy, I turned the subject to immigration. I said, in your experience, you're from India, you're here, you're a U.S. citizen now. Are we losing, as is frequently said by folks from Microsoft, Silicon Valley folks, and so forth? Are we losing on people? And he didn't want to go there on the specific about public policy. He made a different point. He said, in this country, you can create a community of innovation. Now, isn't that fascinating? In this country, you can create, notice that create. What does that mean? It means the foundation is freedom. Obviously, you need resources, but you need freedom of the mind, and you need an environment that is encouraging what? Creativity and innovation. That, in turn, is the beginning of the feedback loop that promotes further commitments to freedom, freedom of inquiry, and the like, and along the way, it leads to job creation. Look at our neighbors to the north. We don't have to use the research park here. You know those facts. But troubled Michigan, which, Detroit and bankruptcy and so forth, but one of the engines of dynamism in that part of the world right now is the Michigan Research Park, which is Michigan State, University of Michigan, and Wayne State. Yes, Wayne State in Detroit. And when you look at the kind of intellectual property that's flowing out of those research parks, it is extraordinary. When you look at the explosion of job creation, so we don't have to even go to Silicon Valley or Research Triangle Park, do we? We don't have to go up to Route 28 and to see the symbiotic relationship between the great universities of Massachusetts. It is a good thing, and it's an encouraging thing, and alumni and trustees need to encourage that over the last 20 years, there's been an explosion of entrepreneurship programs in American higher education. Hazard a guess as to how many entrepreneurship programs there are in higher education among colleges and universities. Anyone want to guess? Shall I call on someone? 2,000 on the dot. You have a very smart board. Now, you might say, 2,000? Didn't you say there were 4,000 or so colleges and universities? And some are standalone, as I understand it. So think of that. 2,000 entrepreneurship programs. See, that is a sea change. This is a commitment, I think, of higher education to the culture of innovation, which I think also encourages the culture of freedom. Now, I do want to say that Baylor is ranked number 5 among those 2,000 programs. Now, the enterprise, if it is to be done correctly, is going to be costly. And I recognize that there are efficiencies to be achieved, and there are hard questions to ask as to why this service is being provided or not. I do think that one of the things that has eroded, which has significantly contributed to the $1 trillion in student debt, is the fact that, not necessarily out of anything other than choice and lifestyle, students are taking too long to get out of college. Student indebtedness explodes in the 5th year. Some programs are 5 years. At Baylor, you want an engineering degree, get ready for 5 years. You want an accounting degree, get ready for 5 years. But the vast majority, including pre-med, and we've got about 1/3 of our students are pre-med, at least until they take organic chemistry with Kevin. And so one of my mantras has been Baylor in 4. Isn't that nice of them to applaud that? You may be having fun here. Now sometimes you say, well, wait, I changed my major and so forth. Wisdom, discernment, and planning. Let's think. At Baylor, we would say, think prayerfully about this early on. Let's search ourselves and do the very best we can to make sure that this is the right choice for us. A way of example, our School of Education, our future student teachers are in the classrooms in their sophomore year, because if he were here, John Engelhardt, our wonderful dean of the School of Education, would say, we don't want student teachers discovering in their senior year of college that this wasn't their choice. Those kinds of careful planning by the university, the college, as well as obviously the student herself. Second, and isn't this true in the public arena? Surely, but I tell you, it's always been the case in the private arena, and that is increased philanthropy and the new funding model. Why has tuition gone up? Complex. Let's ask ourselves. We need to be introspective about that. But certainly in the publics, I'll tell you, it's because support for the operating budget has precipitously declined. At the University of Texas flagship, when I was going to school, I wasn't in school there, approximately 80% of the operating budget came from us, the taxpayers. Now it's 13% of the operating budget. So those are just economic realities, and we have to look at that. So what is that? It seems to me that, and we've done it at Baylor, really calling on the alumni and friends to say, in addition to your football tickets or your basketball tickets, do something to help our students who are going to be coming, who are there now and who are coming along besides. And to have a governing board that says, this is very important. We want to win with integrity in all of our, however many intercollegiate sports we have at our university, but we also need to be really focused on the academic enterprise. Are we endowing those chairs? Are we, in fact, doing what we can for our students? So let me close as I began. Religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. If it was good enough for George Washington, James Madison, and the First Congress, like that old country hymn, it's good enough for me. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks very, very much, Ken Starr, for enlightening and soul-searching talk. Now, our second speaker for the afternoon is Peter Hans. Peter is currently the chairman of the University of North Carolina Board of Governors, a position he's held since 2012. Peter's been a member of the Board of Governors since 2003. He's been chosen for that position 3 times by the North Carolina Senate. And while on the board, he served on several presidential searches and a variety of task forces. And prior to his service on the Board of Governors, Peter was on the North Carolina State Board of Community Colleges from 1997 to 2003. Peter works for the Rawling law firm Nelson, Mullins, Riley, and Scarborough. He earned his bachelor's degree at UNC Chapel Hill and holds also a master's degree in liberal arts from Harvard. Please join me in welcoming Peter Hans.
Thank you so much, George. I feel like the young man in the choir following a performance by Pavarotti. But it is an honor to be here with President Starr and all of you today. His long record of public service is truly admirable, and I'm appreciative to the Pope Center for making sure his presence here is possible today. and for their continued role in sparking much-needed conversations about the future of higher education, like this conversation today. I'm going to be brief in my comments so that we can spend more time enjoying the comments of our distinguished guest. But I would say my most succinct response to President Starr's comments and his insights would be to say, amen. Maybe you could stay around North Carolina for a little while longer. I've got a campus or two could benefit from your wisdom. On a personal note, I embrace the view that faith is central to a deeper understanding of ourselves, our place in the world, and certainly human liberty. Of course, as he alluded, there are certain parameters a public institution must work with in this sense. But I'm pleased to see private institutions like Baylor have remained true to their founder's vision about the spiritual dimension in learning. It is the challenge of public institutions to find ways of making sure our students are also able to walk similar paths of their own accord. I believe President Starr has actually outlined a number of ways that higher education can help students cultivate lives of greater meaning and increase institutional effectiveness. To repeat just a few that stood out to me, my ear, a renewed emphasis on academic rigor, civics education, spreading entrepreneurship across the curriculum, and the importance of private fundraising as well. The UNC system is making progress in these areas and others, though much work remains to be done. We've raised admission standards and academic progress standards. We're using technology to improve traditional classes and expand our reach to non-traditional audiences. We're preparing to measure learning outcomes more fully to ensure that value is added. And we're taking a fresh look at our general education requirements to make certain we are focusing on the key competencies that we believe all college graduates must possess. Some of the very similar, same qualities, really, that President Starr just discussed. These are crucial to our shared success in our economy, in our democracy, and our culture. The one piece of silver lining in the recent budget cuts excuse me, is that our system has made significant and intentional advances in lowering cost per degree, in operational efficiencies, and eliminating academic duplication. We are rewarding performance, accountability, and more clearly establishing our priorities. Thanks to the state's Constitution and North Carolina's generous public investment, tuition remains a bargain here compared to our peers. Though it must be noted it has risen sharply, and thus President Tom Ross has recommended that there be no increase in the coming year. Retaining faculty is a competitive issue for us, as is elevating the relative importance of teaching in the reward structure of academia. Because quality teaching, really connecting with students' imagination, remains the key to endowing them with the depth and the breadth of the knowledge and skills they need. And I believe that really was President Starr's message to us today. So there are many good things going on. Lives changed, discoveries made, horizons broadened. Higher education, and it comes in many different forms, does add value to society. And done well, it passes along our values as well. And we shouldn't lose sight of that fact. So the criticisms made of higher education, costs too much, delivers too little, the scarcity of intellectual diversity, the lagging graduation rates, etc. These are well known. And in all candor, I myself subscribe to much of this critique and the need for thoughtful change. I've spoken out about this in our board deliberations. We would like for the University of North Carolina to serve as a counterexample to these criticisms. We would like the University of North Carolina to recommit itself to excellence, to affordability, to engagement, and open inquiry, much as I believe Baylor and its president are doing. I would welcome his thoughts and yours on how we best achieve that. Thank you.
Now we have quite a good deal of time, I'm happy to say, for question and answers. I think Mitch is going to intervene here.
I'm just going to click this stuff off. Excuse me.
Good work. And I'm going to exercise the moderator's prerogative and kick it off. A hobby horse of my own, and one that the Pope Center has been thrashing for a number of years, is that many college students never learn how to write worth a darn. It's hard work to grade, critique student writing. Faculty members, to a large extent, just don't want to bother with it. And therefore, we find college students graduating, and when they get out in the business world, their employers say, gee, this guy can't even write a coherent memo. How do you ever get through college? So what can we do to instill in the faculty the idea that working with students on their writing ability is crucial? Any thoughts, gentlemen?
I'm happy to. Should we move closer?
Yeah, let's
or?
do this.
Okay. We actually lift up the importance of writing, thinking, communication skills in our aspirational statements. That one should be, in order to be prepared for a lifetime of citizenship and constructive membership in the community, to be quite articulate. And therefore, that student should have had significant writing experiences and opportunities for verbal communication. One of the things we say early on is you do not need to use the word like every 3 words. In fact, less frequently we hear that word, the higher our regard will be. You know? Dude. So we're trying through both the aspirational statements and through the required curriculum of English, and including the opportunity to write both as a freshman but throughout the experience, to have that opportunity both with respect to writing, editing, but also with respect to you need to be able to, Senator, to stand on your feet. And to learn to persuade, that the part of life that is so critical, from the family to whatever the enterprise is to be a persuasive speaker. So here are ways in which we encourage that. So this is a value that we infuse throughout the curriculum.
Well, I couldn't agree with that more. I think the opportunity for students to participate in writing-intensive classes is not particularly pleasurable to them, perhaps, but it is very important to their future. I hear the same thing from employers. I see it in young people myself, and I don't know whether it's partially a reflection of their proclivity to text, and communicate in shorthand, but it is crucial to have top-notch written and verbal communication skills, and I don't think that's going to pass at any time in the future.
I would also say, when I'm asked specifically by students, you pride yourself on your writing, rightly or wrongly, I said one of the keys to great writing is reading great writing. And there is simply not enough of that, is there? So to encourage a culture of serious reading as well as in those actual writing experiences.
I'd say I don't know about you, Mr. President, but my sense is the faculty actually shares this concern about the quality of students' writing abilities.
Yeah, many of the students are not having these writing experiences in their pre-college education. So it obviously is a broader societal issue and public education issue as to what is it that we are doing, especially after the third grade, because these students are creative. They have great imaginations and the like, but they've just so many times have not had the rigorous kind of editing that you're talking about. That yes, it can indeed be very humbling, but that's part of the growth as a communicator.
Exactly right.
Yes, ma'am.
I was just on a plane with a gentleman, a salesman with a large hardwood floor company, and we had a great chat, and he said, I can't find anyone applying for a job at my company that could sit on the plane and do this. So while I'm concerned about the writing, of course, and I feel like there's something very constructive you could do within, high school and college on that, what do we do about the lack of social skills? How would you address that within higher learning? Mentoring can play a part, yes. What else can one do?
I think that alumni and friends, certainly parents, should be very concerned about the quality of student life. We focus rightly on the academic enterprise. First and foremost, that's what it is about. But when I mentioned entrepreneurship, one of the things I lift up, and I think other higher education servant leaders do the same thing, is you will end up having great learning experiences in your residence halls and in your extracurricular organizations. Opportunities for leadership development and opportunities for the development of these kinds of social skills. So at Baylor, we have over 300 student organizations, including but not limited to Greek life. What I say at freshman orientation is you will soon find out about this myriad of organizations. So they are many, but you will also find, some of you will, that there is a passion or an interest that is not being fulfilled. Start that organization. Do you know how great that is for a student or a group of students to do a startup for an extracurricular organization? They develop those skills, so we'll send did you get his card? Because I'm going to send a bunch of Baylor students to sell those hardwood floors. By the way, you talk about instrumentalists. We have a school of professional salesmanship. I said, what? A school of professional salesmanship? What do you mean? And they said, well, it's in the business. No, they have to study Aristotle, but they're going to go. And you should see the employers line up. These these students all have multiple offers. So there are different ways that we can do it. You say, well, wait, do we really want that at our college or university? Maybe not, but guess what? Sales is important in life. Don't you think, Arch? We're lawyers.
High Point University has a steakhouse on campus to train in dining, fine dining. Did you know that?
I did not know that, and I may tack that home. Yeah.
To the proper dining experience and the manners that go along.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Well, it's a really interesting point and something that President Ross and I have discussed, and I'm glad he's here. He's a fine leader of our system. I appreciate him being here.
Oh, I didn't acknowledge the judge. I'm sorry, Justice. How are you?
Yeah.
Mr. President?
We've talked about the practical skills that I think you're referencing, and it can be as small as the ability to look someone in the eye as you're speaking with them, and a firm handshake and a confident voice. And of course, some of our students possess these skills. I had the wonderful privilege recently, Judge, when I was in South Africa visiting with our honors program students over there, and gosh, they were more composed at 20 than I am today. So, there are encouraging signs out there, but maybe to have a class of practical skills, really just life lessons, like the ones I think you're referencing, might might actually be quite useful.
We do have it, and this doesn't quite accomplish what High Point is doing, and I like that idea of you will actually sit down and hear table manners and so forth. But we do have a mandatory course called University 1000, and we're getting not just this is Baylor life, but this is life in society. This is life in community. And great friendships, sometimes weddings, emerge out of University 1000. So it doesn't have that much of an academic component, a little touch of that, but it's much more, what's it like to be human? And what is it? Some of those questions that students want to be able to talk about in a small and unthreatening place. And it's not graded. So we do have grades. You know, there's none of this pass, whatever. You do get a grade, but not in University 1000, but you do have to show up.
Yes, this gentleman.
Yeah, George, I got a couple of questions, very diverse. Number one, what we find in our higher education system is a lack of metrics for measuring the achievement in the higher education system.
Why don't you tackle that?
We don't know if the student, when he comes to university or she comes to university, whether they have really accomplished anything. Some of the examples, and I don't want to use CLA as an example, but basically communication and analytical skills and similar skills when they come to school and when they graduate out of the school, there's hardly any change in that. And except for maybe 200 universities, not many universities are measuring the accomplishment after the graduation. So I'd like to see what's the experience of the Baylor. Number two, just today I saw in the
Oh.
Chronicles of Higher Education that the presidents, and I have president right here, they only believe that 38% of the Board of Governors are qualified to serve on the board. So what has been your I would like to hear your experience.
Well, I don't think we're doing an adequate job. I accept the point, and I take it as a constructive criticism in terms of learning outcomes. Part of it, I think, derives from the traditions of academic freedom and the silos that exist, that it really is up to that school or that college to make these determinations, you know, with the individual faculty member as to, you know, has that student accomplished? So at graduation, at commencement, we say on the certification of the faculty and the deans. Now, there is academic freedom then in determining within the School of Engineering or Computer Science or in the Department of Classics, what is it that that student has needed to achieve? So there is a sort of culture of delegation and deference that obtains at Baylor. There's a reliance on the rigor that we think is in place, but then the application of that within the respective school or college.
Ari, I told him in the midst of your conversation you were a ringer and one of my fellow board members, so I warned him. And Judge, he's an example of one of our very finest board members, an example of engaged trusteeship, and fortunate to have his leadership. Ari, if you don't mind me just sharing with the rest of the group that our board has made the decision in conjunction with President Ross that we need to more closely measure student learning outcomes to show that value is being added during the course of one's education. And if it is not, then that obviously points to a problem. But I think that we can show that, and we will show that, and it will, in fact, strengthen our case with public investment over time.
In the back. Sir. Yes, sir. President Starr, we're here. We have a freshman at Baylor.
Oh, Sikkim Bears.
Sikkim Bears. Saturday
I like this.
We're playing West Virginia. So.
And speaking of the academic rigor, he is in the Honors College in the Baylor Interdisciplinary Corps. And so we have gotten many tweets at 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning from the 24-hour library talking about the writing. But tell us a little bit more about that concept of that classical model of education and how Baylor's doing it and how that might fit more in the higher university setting.
Well, it means that your student is extremely well equipped as a freshman. What is his or her name?
Joshua Spear.
All right. Joshua obviously was very talented, and so we're thankful to have Joshua there. And the whole idea of the Honors College and the interdisciplinary core is you may think you want to be a doctor, you may know you want to be an engineer, you may think you want to be a pastor, you may want to do this, but let's come together in community and study very seriously and rigorously together a wide interdisciplinary and lots of opportunities for the closest kind of relationships with the faculty. So the Baylor Interdisciplinary, notice the word core, so you will be able to choose in a very interdisciplinary fashion under the umbrella of the Honors College, but you will in fact have had a very broad-based and deep education. And I think the level of satisfaction, can I do learning outcomes measurement as in a sophisticated way as the University of North Carolina system does? I can't, but what I can say is the anecdotal evidence is extremely powerful that the Honors College and the big Baylor Interdisciplinary Core program is structurally, it's about 15 years old now, is structurally very sound. Dean Tom Hibbs continues with the faculty, academic freedom, to tweak that program. But we think that it is, in fact, a model for when that individual, when Joshua graduates, Joshua is going to be a very well-educated citizen. And we think he's going to have great opportunities for spiritual formation as well, which will be just invaluable. Sic 'em bears.
Is that what this is?
That's what this is.
Okay. I like it.
In your speech, you talk about the goal of the faculty and the curriculum should be able to promote academic freedom. As the current UNC...
Or actually, I said freedom more generally, yeah, but including, but not limited to academic.
How, as a UNC Chapel student, senior, can I help promote this freedom that you speak of?
Well, that will depend contextually on what you see as your environment, but I would say first, do you write for the newspaper?
I write for the Carolina Review and the Carolina Review Daily.
Excellent. Well, I think that is, we need to be sharing ideas. Richard Weaver said famously, ideas have consequences. And so I encourage our students, even if they're not, we have journalism as a major, people say, do I get a job after I've majored in journalism? I said, yes, you will be able to, but you've got to be flexible and creative and get a job plan and so forth. But I really encourage that kind of expression going beyond just the blogosphere, but really writing in a way that's very serious and is subject to an editorial process. It's one of the weaknesses of the blogosphere. It's a great friend of freedom, isn't it? But there is also no editor, much less an editor-in-chief. So there's no quality kind of filter whatsoever. Whereas working with a journal, and so that's one of the things that I think you can say, part of my theme for this next few months of my service here in Chapel Hill is going to be, I'm going to be a sentinel and a voice of freedom. Now, you need to then steep yourself, as you probably already have, in the culture of freedom and how important it is in a very dangerous world where freedom is under terrible threat in so much of the world. Yes, right here at home, but so much of the world. What is it? Can we have some foundational principles that we agree to based on, and so you can be a spokesperson for the foundational idea that I don't think should be viewed as Western. It's embodied and embedded in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, that every single person has dignity, that every single person has worth, and that means certain things flow from that. You can speak of this theologically, but you can also speak of it entirely from a secularist perspective, that as a human being, I have certain, and what are those rights? And part of it is the now captured in the global charter of freedom that's now under serious discussion in European capitals is I have what Mr. Jefferson would call those inalienable rights. And among those, and we're being more articulately what shall I say, specific in the 21st century than you needed to be in the 18th century. And enumerating those is freedom of conscience and belief, including, for example, this is very important in the world today, to be free to change your religion and to be free from coercion with respect to worship, belief, and the like. Do we need that in the world today? Yes, we do. And you can be a voice in favor of that.
That's very eloquent, Mr. President. I'd just like to mention, I wrote for the Carolina Review when I was an undergrad at Chapel Hill. And, you know, sometimes it can be a little lonely to be a conservative on campus, but it also gives you the strength of your convictions, and you're off to a great start. I'm glad you're here today.
Andy Taylor.
Thank you, George. Can I just piggyback on that basic point? As someone who's, in the words of President Starr, trying to change things within,
It's one of our professors at NC State.
Would ask those of you who are trying to change things from without for some help. As I feel that I'm kind of in the minority, and I think that you guys are probably more, if not in a majority, perhaps in plurality on the outside. And so I guess I'm not one of those people who believes that there needs to be a whole-scale revolution in higher education, but I do think there needs to be some substantive reform. So I guess this is a request in the spirit of President Starr as well, that if you see faculty members who are interested in these kinds of things that President Starr has talked about, that you provide them with some support. Morrill is great, some cover, some hospitality once in a while would be very welcome as well. For faculty who are interested in making academic freedom, in true freedom of expression on campus, who are interested in curricular innovation, we in the minority would appreciate the help from you in the majority once in a while.
Well, I appreciate the sentiments, and your comments put me in mind of the words of Gerhard Casper, the president emeritus of Stanford University, who at convocation said words to this effect: at Stanford, arguments must be met on the merits. So he was almost laying down a rule of engagement. You must meet the arguments on the merits as opposed to the ad hominem questioning of motives and the like. Let's just have a serious conversation and we can end up agreeing to disagree in a civil way. And then one of the reforms that he put in, which I think is extraordinarily helpful for large universities, whether public or private, and it's by no means original to Stanford, but he said we have to have the most senior members of the faculty engaged with freshmen. We don't want, as much fun as it is to be dealing with juniors, seniors, graduate students, postdocs, and so forth, and that is, they're becoming peers. But you need to be there at the very formative stage. I realize this isn't giving comfort and succor, but it's creating an environment that is just a much more open environment of shared values, of commitment to the fundamental enterprise of education. And so if the overall DNA is, let's have, in the great spirit of the university, a conversation to which all persons are welcome, and let's get the most senior members of the faculty dealing with the most junior members, our student, I like to call the students co-discoverers, because they are. You're around an 18-year-old, you're going to learn something. Hopefully they'll learn more from you, but it's going to be a reciprocal and symbiotic relationship if we will open our ears and our eyes to what they have to say. So I think beginning to create that kind of university, the interdisciplinary core at Baylor just encourages this broader kind of conversation so that you've got sociologists sitting down and talking with chemistry profs. And one of the innovations that I had, again, nothing to do with, it's embarrassing to see you had nothing to do with this great thing you want to talk about, but that's the beauty of a university, a lot of talented people, are creativity seminars for the faculty. Are you being, and the answer is always no, as creative as you possibly can in your own field? So brown bag lunches. Let's get with creativity. First of all, what does creativity mean? Let's talk about that. And then let's have a conversation cutting across interdisciplinary lines about what that means in your particular field. But we also need just to say, You're welcome to the community, even if you were, quote, in the minority in terms of worldview or whatever. That's really, it's illiberal to begin with. So let's have a stipulation that everyone is welcome to the conversation, and that we're not going to exclude or otherwise discriminate against one because her views or his views are seen as less enlightened or less progressive.
I'm delighted to have a chance to show off one of our finest political scientists and Professor Taylor here in our system. So thank you for that question. You know, I believe change is coming to higher education, whether we're ready for it or not. It's occurring organically, and the best that we can do is plan ahead for it and try to be prepared. And I think it's important that we make sure we include all voices in that conversation, and the faculty among them. And I would encourage you to gather with colleagues to join us in that, Andrew, because sometimes the voice that we hear is one of a different generation and a different outlook. And so I find the younger faculty tend to have a more welcoming view to the idea that higher education is evolving in a way that I hope will be good for not only the university but for our country.
Gentleman in the back. Yes.
Well, I think one of the things that we haven't discussed yet is the perverse reward system that universities have, which undermines this whole idea that we should have creativity seminars and mentoring for undergraduates. Because if you want to get it big in university life, if you're in the sciences, your rewards are going to come by bringing in grant money. If you're in the humanities or the social sciences, your rewards are going to be related not to how good an undergraduate teacher you are, but how many publications you have. And this has a further perverse incentive, and that is that many, many faculty are just birds of passage. The university where they happen to be teaching now is just a way station onto a better university that will pay them more money. And until you get to the root of that reward structure, and I'm speaking as a retired professor from Tulane University, the former chair of my department. I taught there for 40 years, so I'm not guilty of what I'm describing, but I know a lot of people have gone through, and they know from the day one that they're not going to stay. They're on their way to somewhere else. And if they do stay, they know that the payoff is in publication and grantsmanship and not in teaching.
Well, I am reminded of a story that the late Judge Bork told about the then brand new dean of the Yale Law School, Harry Wellington, who was young enough to have young children, and at Halloween he piled the children into his vehicle, and he had all the addresses of some of the older professors at the Yale Law School. And so he would drive the Wellington kids, and they'd get out of the car, go ring the doorbell, and regardless of who opened the door, the Halloween greeting was, "Publish or perish." And then they ran back candyless to the car to go on to the next port of call. So there is that. This is an institutional choice, and it is an institutional choice that can be shaped by beginning with the Board of Regents or the Board of Trustees. The Board of Regents, the governing board, can say, this is who we are, and we intend to be steadfast in our commitment to it. So I can speak to the Baylor experience. Controversially, within our community, Baylor for 15 years has emphasized the importance of research and scholarship. These things are matters of degree because research and scholarship has always been part of the American Academy. It's a matter of emphasis, isn't it? It's a matter of degree. But in making it clear that there needs to be a discovery dimension, whether it's in the humanities or in the STEM. There has to be moving, not just the transmission belt, as we say, but there has to be a deepening or expanding of knowledge. How does that translate into the ultimate kind of reward, which is tenure? Now, folks here will have different ideas on tenure, but get over it, it's here. It's been here for a long time, and it will remain. Now, I just lost my audience, and everybody is about to throw. But you're too polite to throw things at me. But I say that lovingly to get over it. But so we have to make, and it's ultimately obviously the president's decision, but guided by the provost, guided by the deans, as to who gets tenure. Happily, and by the way, there needs to be consistency and a lack of arbitrariness and a lack of caprice, and there must be great clarity. We call it crystalline clarity. This is what is expected for tenure, or first for promotion, then for tenure, and then eventual promotion to full professor. At Baylor, with the guidance and direction ultimately of the fiduciaries, the trustees, the regents, we have said at Baylor, great teaching is non-negotiable. And I have personally presided over meetings where the decision is made to deny an appeal of denial of tenure. And in each instance, with a few exceptions, it has been, you were not a great enough teacher. Non-negotiable. Now, it should not come to the tenure decision, because if the tenure process is working as it should, there should be no surprises along the way. There should be due process. There should be plenty of notice and the opportunity with resources from our Academy of Teaching to become a better teacher. But that is ultimately an institutional choice. How are you going to weigh it in the balance? You do have to have research, you do have to have scholarship, but what is non-negotiable is, in fact, great teaching, which we also say includes mentoring.
I find it difficult to improve on that answer.
Over here.
President Starr, given the challenge,
I want you to get all this.
in particular for financial challenges, online, which you mentioned in the dialogue, it seems to be the preeminent remedy espoused by most. Some even can't see that. Relative to the three goals that you identified, vigor, and leadership, and the others, how does this factor into Baylor's future, this online factor?
We're quite excited about the future. We welcome it under the auspices of the provost, the chief academic officer. A university-wide task force completed recently a year-long examination of what's happening out there and then what is happening here. And I think the prospects are extremely bright for improving learning outcomes. We know, for example, that virtual labs in organic chemistry can result in higher learning outcomes than the real thing. I was shocked by that, but then again, what do I know about organic chemistry? Nothing. So I accept that. And the more the studies are flowing in, and I've seen this in poli-sci, by the way, it does in fact work. The lecture is online, and you better have done the lecture when you come to class. Now that you have heard the lecture and done the readings, now let's really drill in, go deep, and the like. Now, with respect to MOOCs, all of the very exciting things that are happening with online degrees and so forth, it's much too soon to know how successful and how transformative that will be. Clay Christensen of the Harvard Business School, who talks about this disruption in technology, and will this in fact be disruptive? I don't know the answer to that. What I do know is that right now it is helping in a very foundational, you just came from South Africa, because very little or very small percentage of the world's population has any access whatsoever to higher education of any kind. So at a moral and policy level, that's one of the things I'm most excited about, that students who otherwise zero chance of any option of being of connecting to higher education will have that. I do think, Duke is here, Campbell is here, the UNC system is here, that there will always be a place, and you have connections to community college, for the 4-year, which has become 5, the 4-year residential college experience. I think there will always be an important service served by that phenomenal transformative experience. One of our most successful, as the world measures success, alums now in his 70s who emphasizes the importance of mentorship said, I learned much more in the dorm than I did in the classroom. The late president of Baylor said, Drayton, stop saying that. You know, but that goes to student life and extracurricular life, and you're just not going to be able to create that, I think, in the virtual community, and you will not have that opportunity for the education for wisdom, the extracurricular groups, at least as we now see it. But 30 years from now, 40 years from now, who knows? Now, having said all that, I'm excited about the idea of MOOC availability when you've got this renowned Nobel laureate from whatever teaching a course. I'm excited that that can become available, and we're taking a look at how's it graded, how do we decide how much credit that gets, what does that do in terms of our revenue stream. For colleges and universities, the idea of providing some kind of online education is a possible alternative revenue stream. Obviously, everyone is looking at that, and the marketplace, I think, will get pretty crowded. But I'm excited about that dimension of it, too, including lifelong learning. I mean, I have professors at my university, you have professors that wouldn't you love to sit at their feet, so to speak, and you will soon be able, if you're not able to do it already. Well, I think, frankly, Samuel Johnson said famously in the 18th century, only a blockhead writes for free. Well, I don't think that you should pay. There's no free riders. Economics 101, no free lunch. And so this may, in fact, be a source of revenue, which we very much need. We need to be creative when it comes to being revenue generators as opposed to being so tuition dependent, which almost all of American higher education now is.
I share your enthusiasm about the potential for the democratization of that knowledge because that holds enormous potential, I think, for our state, for our country, for the entire world. We're using technology aggressively, really, to supplement our traditional classes. The flipping the classroom model holds a lot of potential as well to enable students to learn more quickly in a way that they're used to doing so. And so I'm a big proponent of this, and this is something that we're actually going deeper and deeper in every day.
Ken Starr returns his con law class at Baylor in MOOC. I'll sign up for it right away.
Well, there will be a fee.
Maybe that'll be covered by the Pope Center.
As tempting as it is to ask about college athletics and higher education in today's environment, I actually want to ask a question about funding. And my question is, in light of what President Starr said about the University of Texas decrease in public funding, is that good for public universities, or does this present a danger to the concept of public universities increasingly getting a smaller and smaller percentage of public support?
Well, I think it's a huge public policy conversation that I don't think we're really having. So let me launch into, and thank you, Judge, for raising it. 23 college programs athletic programs operate in the black. The rest of us operate in the red. It's just a matter of how deep in the red is it. Football is the great cross-subsidizer. Even college basketball is only to barely breaks even. And so what about all those wonderful Olympic sports that we call them somewhat pejoratively, we love them, but they're the non-revenue sports, so we're subsidizing that. But you know what? Those 600 student athletes so enrich the life of our campus. So I think it's great, and many of those student athletes, obviously given the skills we were talking about, cross country, running and so forth, some of the skills and disciplines that one gets as a student athlete in college translate into remarkable success, contributions in life. Some of the greatest breakthroughs in medicine, I can point, those were student athletes who did it as doctors. Do you know what I'm saying? So there's that intangible that is so very, very important. But I do think it's important for us to, and we can have a very rich conversation about that, to say that we need to make sure that those students who are student athletes, which as you said was come up with an interesting genealogy to that, are genuinely students. And I don't want to step on toes here because I know there have been some recent wounds and so forth, but you're addressing those. Every school is going to have some sort of issue with respect to that. But I do think that overall I have come to appreciate the energizing role that college athletics brings, the excitement, and all I can say is people are more generous to your university. The classics department will benefit from a winning football team.
You know, Bob, to your point about the public investment in higher education, I think we'll give you the opportunity.
I got it from college athletics.
I note that it's really healthcare spending that is crowding out increasingly spending on education at the federal and state levels. And in terms of our future, the future of the state, the country, I believe education is the better investment, and we've got to figure out how to get a handle on healthcare costs.
Move to extend my remarks ever so briefly. This came home to me very powerfully. So lawyers love stories, so here's my brief story. When I first arrived at Baylor University, the Big 12 found itself in a state of chaos, and who's in and who's out. Well, the University of Nebraska and the University of Colorado said, we're out. I was on the subcommittee to negotiate the terms of their exit. And I'll always remember one of the institutions just giving the figures as to how state support for the operational budget had precipitously declined over the last 20 years. And so there it was, down to, in that particular state, 8%. And the reason I say that this is a public policy issue, yes, certain other expenditures were making those public policy choices through our legislatures that this is more important. Now maybe it's a mandate from Washington, D.C., our hands are tied and so forth. Huge public policy debate. I find it quite interesting in terms of issues of governance. So I'll step on some more toes. I remember I was privileged to serve in the Reagan administration as a young pup. And in New Hampshire, in the New Hampshire primary, Ronald Reagan made a comment. Remember this occurrence? I paid for this microphone, Mr. McGillicuddy, and so this person, so I paid for this microphone, so he is controlling then, he's saying that person should be able to use the microphone. If students, parents, and philanthropy are accounting for 92% of the budget, what is their role in the governance of the system? I don't even think we're having that conversation.
I think we have time for about one more question.
Don't mean to step on your toes.
No, sir.
Running a little bit short. Grover Proctor.
When George and I were on faculty at the same university up in Michigan, I got thrown into the issue of accreditation during the cycles that we were meeting the requirements of our regional accreditors. And I got really thrown into it, became a peer reviewer and all of that. So I sort of see this from two different perspectives, and I wonder what yours is about the role of regional accreditation today, especially as I hear accreditors say the Department of Ed is trying their very best to minimize their importance and perhaps legislate them out of existence, whereas at the same time, the accreditors find themselves between not only the Department of Ed, but the schools themselves that they're supposed to be serving. How much good is regional accreditation doing for you?
Well, I'm relatively new to that enterprise, but I would just say this. My experiences, limited though they have been entirely favorable, with having essentially peer review from accrediting agencies coming in, and I have not seen a, quote, hidden agenda. but highly skilled people of goodwill who are finding the good and then finding areas in which you can improve. But I will say this, I would certainly welcome self-regulation of the industry through regional accrediting agencies as opposed to federalizing once again yet another part of our life.
Thank you for saying that. I think we have time for one more question in the back.
This gentleman was asking to be recognized.
I believe just recently the Duke Endowment made a $3 million grant, I think, to Davidson, Duke, and maybe Furman. And the grant was to come up with ways to teach students, our undergraduates, resiliency. How to be resilient. And I wonder if at Baylor you have noticed that's something that needs to be taught. I know as a parent who's had 3 children go through school, I've raised them in great affluence, made sure they didn't suffer at all. And so perhaps that is part of what some of our students in our culture now need. At least it was enough that Duke Endowment is given that money. Do you have any thoughts?
My thought.
It's not morality, but it's kind of learning how to get up after you fail.
Right, get up, dust yourself off, and get back in the ring, and keep at it. Life is filled with failure, so how do you deal with it and then march on? I would say the closest thought that comes to me is just trying to ensure that we understand this generation, especially in student life. Let's make sure that we understand this generation. And there's a lot of sociology out there about this generation. This may explain, Jeff, if you have any comments about what has just been asked or mentioned. What we know is this is the most needy emotionally generation ever, and yet it's also the most self-confident in terms of their views of their own abilities. So there's this needfulness, and yet there is this great self-confidence that I'm going to do great. And we're trying to work our way through that. If you think you're going to do great and you're making all A's at your high school and all of a sudden, oh my word, an A is really hard to come by here at Chapel Hill or at North Carolina State or at Campbell or at Duke or wherever. How do you deal with that? And what we have found at our sweet place called Baylor is there are heavy demands on counseling, and those are professional counselors. I will say that one of the great things that, at least in our experience, has been a proverbial and literal godsend are residential leaders, our community leaders. They are so helpful to those freshmen and sophomores, saying, you can do it. Here's a copy of, do you remember The Little Engine That Could? Everybody else couldn't. And David Reisman, the great late sociologist, said that is a metaphor for America. We know it's the metaphor of the America of the 20th century. We hope and pray it'll be the metaphor of America in the 21st century. So I think that peer counseling can be a great help, and I see a nod here from our student from UNC. Peer counseling can be tremendous, and I'll close with this story. We have a wonderful young woman, Stephanie Allen, who's now, she's graduated 2013. She's now a Rotary Global Fellow at the London School of Tropical Medicine. She had a 4.0 in pre-med, but twice along her journey, she was about to check out of pre-med. But time one, a graduate student, a graduate assistant in one of her chemistry classes came alongside her, mentored her, got her back up. And then the second time, which was a real existential crisis, it took a faculty member. But as she was saying farewell, she said those two mentors, a graduate student and then Professor Lisa Baker, who's an MD, PhD, brought her back. So you've got to have people, whether it's teaching a course or not, life is relational, isn't it? And you need that loved one, whether it's a hall advisor, we call them CLs, community leaders, or professors. And that's where I think the answer is. Building what we call at Baylor and our mission statement, a caring community. And then we elaborate on that where we love and care for one another, and this is important, forgive one another. Creating a caring community, and out of that, I think, will come this kind of resiliency training that may resist a coursework.
Very insightful.
Well, I think it's about time for us to adjourn to our reception.
Here.
Let's have a round of applause for our
Thank you. Marvelous. Did I give you my card?
No, sir. I would love to.